He wasn't looking at my sister. He wasn't looking at my father, who had spent the last 20 minutes angling for his attention like a man pitching the deal of a lifetime. Dr. Harmon was looking at me, and I smiled, not because I wanted to, not because I'd planned it, but because after 12 years of being the family's footnote, I'd learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is just smile and wait. Let me back up. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a cardiac surgeon at St. Augustine Medical Center in Baltimore. I've been doing this since I was 28, which still feels surreal when I say it out loud, because my father spent most of my teenage years telling me I was wasting a good mind on the wrong things. My father's name is Gerald. He built a real estate development firm from nothing, which is the story he tells at every dinner, every holiday, and apparently every engagement party. He has 2 daughters. My older sister, Phoebe, blonde, warm, the kind of woman who remembers birthdays and sends thank you notes within 48 hours, is everything he always wanted in a child. She's a marketing director at a mid-size firm downtown. She golfs. She attends the right charity events. She laughs at the right moments. And then there's me. I went pre-med at Johns Hopkins, then med school, then residency in general surgery, then a fellowship in cardiothoracics. Somewhere in there I missed my cousin's wedding, my grandfather's 80th birthday party, and approximately every single Christmas Eve from 2016 to 2021. My father never let me forget any of it. You made your choice, he'd say. Not unkindly, but not kindly either. Just, factually, like I'd picked a career the way someone picks a difficult roommate. Something inconvenient but manageable. When I matched into my fellowship, he asked me if I was sure. When I told him I'd been offered a position at St. Augustine, he nodded slowly and said, "That's good. Phoebe just got promoted. So, that's Gerald, now. The engagement party. Phoebe met a man named Thomas Wells 2 years ago at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital Foundation. Thomas is wonderful, genuinely, not performatively wonderful. He's quiet and steady, and he looks at Phoebe like she hung every star. I liked him immediately, which surprised me, because I tend to be cautious about people who seem too good to be true. Thomas's father, though. That was the part of the story that made my father sit up very straight. Richard Wells. Dr. Richard Wells, former chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Published in the New England Journal of Medicine, more times than I could count off the top of my head. Recipient of the American Heart Association's Lifetime Achievement Award. The kind of physician whose name you learn in medical school, not because someone assigns it, but because it just appears everywhere, in the literature, in case studies, in the footnotes of the papers you're reading at 2 a.m. during your second year. I knew who Dr. Wells was before Thomas ever mentioned him. I'd cited his research in my own fellowship work. There was a technique he'd refined in the early 2000s for minimally invasive mitral valve repair that I had used, with modification, on 3 of my own patients. My father did not know any of this. What my father knew was that Richard Wells had been on the cover of Baltimore Magazine, that he sat on the board of 2 hospitals, and that he golfed at the same club my father had been trying to join for 4 years. So when Phoebe and Thomas announced their engagement in March, and when it was decided that the engagement party would be held at the Wells family home in Roland Park, my father became very serious about the whole enterprise. He called me 3 weeks before the party. Claire. His voice had that particular tone, the one that meant he wanted something and was building up to it carefully. This is important for Phoebe. I need you to understand that. I understand, I said. I was between patients. I had approximately 4 minutes. Dr. Wells is a very distinguished man. I don't want anything to be uncomfortable. I waited. You know how you can get, he said. I still waited. Just be pleasant. Don't bring up work, let Phoebe have her moment. Don't make everything about your career. I'd heard some version of this my whole life. Don't take up too much space. Don't redirect the conversation. Don't let your ambition make the room feel small for everyone else. What he was really saying, what he'd always been saying was, remember that you're the one we didn't expect. Act accordingly. Of course, I said. I'll be there. And Claire. He paused. Maybe don't bring up the hospital stuff. Dr. Wells is retired. He doesn't want to spend his son's engagement party talking shop. I said okay and hung up and went back to work. The day of the party, I drove to Roland Park in scrubs because I'd had a late case, a 72-year-old man with a dissecting aortic aneurysm, the kind of surgery that doesn't wait for social obligations, and I changed in my car in the Wells driveway, which felt appropriately absurd. Navy sheath dress, low heels. I had exactly 12 minutes before the party started. My father saw me arrive and his expression did something complicated. He clocked the dress. He clocked my hair, which I'd managed to pin back. He relaxed slightly, then tensed again when he noticed I'd come alone. "Where's?" he started. "I've been single for 2 years, Dad." He made a small sound and turned back to the room. The Wells home was beautiful in the way that old Roland Park houses are beautiful. Not ostentatious, just settled, confident in itself. Dark wood, cream walls, bookshelves that looked genuinely used. Thomas met us at the door and hugged Phoebe for a long moment, then shook my father's hand, then turned to me. "Claire, I'm so glad you made it." And he meant it, which is the thing about Thomas. He always means it. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, and I meant that too. Dr. Wells was across the room when we arrived, deep in conversation with an older couple I didn't recognize. I saw him from the side, silver hair, good posture, the particular stillness of someone who'd spent decades in operating rooms and learned to conserve every movement. He was thinner than his photographs. That happened sometimes, after retirement. The body didn't know what to do with itself. My father had already spotted him. I watched my father's face arrange itself into the expression he uses when he wants to seem effortlessly connected. Interested but not eager, warm but not desperate. He'd been practicing that face for 40 years. Dinner was served at 7. The table seated 18 people, Thomas's family on one side, ours and a few of Phoebe's closest friends scattered through. I was seated near the end of the table, beside Thomas's aunt, a retired school teacher named Beverly, who wanted to talk about a documentary she'd seen about deep-sea creatures. I was happy to oblige. It was honestly the best conversation I'd had at a family event in years. Then my father tapped his water glass. I knew what was coming. He does this. He gives toasts the way other men file lawsuits, thoroughly, with precedent, leaving no room for appeal. "I want to say a few words," he began, smiling at Phoebe, who smiled back with the practiced ease of someone who'd survived his toasts before. Phoebe has always been the light of our family. From the time she was small, she had this grace. This ability to walk into any room and make everyone in it feel seen. He paused for effect. "Thomas, you are a very lucky man." Thomas nodded genuinely, hand finding Phoebe's on the table. My father kept going. He talked about Phoebe's warmth, her career, her gift for people. All of it true, all of it deserved. And then, because he could not help himself, because he has never been able to help himself, he gestured toward me. "And this is my other daughter, Claire." He said it the way you'd say, "And this is where we keep the extra towels." Informational, slightly apologetic. "She's a doctor, works very long hours." He smiled at Dr. Wells, who was seated 3 chairs down on the opposite side, "But we're very glad she could take the time to be here tonight." Phoebe's eyes flickered to me. Just for a second. I kept my expression pleasant. I had years of practice. "Claire has always been very dedicated," my father continued, and something in his voice shifted just enough that I knew what was coming. Different path from Phoebe, chose her work over most other things. He chuckled. "We used to joke that she was married to that hospital." Light laughter around the table. "But tonight we're all here together, which is what matters." He raised his glass. To Phoebe and Thomas. Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine. Beverly, beside me, gave my arm a small, firm pat, the way women of a certain generation do when they've seen something they disagree with but won't say out loud. The rest of dinner moved along. Thomas's mother, Eleanor, was easy and kind. The food was exceptional. They'd brought in a caterer, something French adjacent. I ate and listened and kept my contribution to the conversation minimal, which I was very good at. Then dessert arrived, and Dr. Wells stood up. He didn't tap his glass. He didn't ask for attention. He simply stood, and the table went quiet, the way tables do when someone of genuine gravity rises. "I want to add something," he said. His voice was low and precise, a surgeon's voice. "Thomas told me a great deal about this family before tonight. He thinks very highly of all of you." He paused. "But I want to make a small correction." My father looked up. Something behind his eyes went very still. Dr. Wells turned, not to Phoebe, not to my father, and looked directly at me. "Dr. Calloway," he said, "I believe we haven't been formally introduced, but I know your work." The table went completely silent. I set down my fork. The Callaway modified approach to minimally invasive mitral repair, he said. I read your paper in the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery last year, and I heard about the Ramirez case from a colleague at St. Augustine. He paused. That was an extraordinary outcome. I didn't know what to do with my face for a moment. I genuinely did not know what to say. Thank you, I said. I based the approach on your 2003 research. I've cited you more times than I can count. He smiled, small genuine. I know. I read the citations. He looked around the table. Your daughter, he said to my father, is one of the most promising cardiac surgeons working in this region, possibly in the country. I want to make sure that was said clearly in this room tonight. He lifted his glass. I'll add my toast to yours, to Phoebe and Thomas, and to the remarkable woman who shares their table. My father's hand, holding his wine glass, went completely rigid. He didn't drop it, but it was close. I saw Phoebe's face, and she was smiling, truly, without reservation, and she reached under the table and squeezed my hand once, hard, and let go. I looked at my father. I don't know exactly what he saw on my face. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was just tired, honestly. Tired in the way you get after a very long surgery, when everything has gone right and you're standing there in the scrub sink, and you realize your legs have been holding you up for 6 hours and you hadn't noticed until now. He set his glass down carefully. He didn't speak. That night, after the party, after I'd said my goodbyes and thanked Thomas's parents, and hugged Phoebe for a long time in the front hallway, my father caught up with me in the driveway. It was cool out. April in Baltimore can go either way, and that night it had decided on cold. I was walking toward my car and I heard his footsteps on the gravel behind me. Claire. I turned. He stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets. The porch light was behind him, and I couldn't quite read his expression, but I could see that something in him had shifted. Gerald has a very particular posture, this braced, forward-leaning quality, like he's always slightly prepared for an argument. He didn't have it right now. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. About the research. The paper. It came out in March, I said. You were in Phoenix for the developer conference. He was quiet for a moment. The leaves in the oak tree at the end of the driveway moved in the wind. You should have told me, he said. And I looked at him. And I thought about all the dinners where I'd tried, all the phone calls where I'd started to say something and he'd redirected to Phoebe's promotion, or his latest project, or something he'd read about the housing market. I thought about the time I'd been named a fellow at the American College of Surgeons, and called him from the hospital parking garage, and he'd said that's good, and then asked if I was dating anyone. I tried, I said. You were busy. He didn't answer that. Dr. Wells said. He started. I know what he said. I was there. He exhaled slowly. I've been hard on you. I didn't say anything. I thought the hours, the missing things. I thought it meant you didn't care about us. He looked down at the gravel. I think I got that wrong. Gerald does not apologize easily. This was as close as I'd heard him come in 31 years. I let it land where it was without pressing on it. I love what I do, I told him. I'm good at it, and I'm still your daughter. Both of those things have always been true at the same time. He nodded once, slowly. We stood there in the driveway a little longer, not saying much. Eventually, I got into my car and drove back to the city. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect that moment to feel like winning, like the credits rolling. It didn't feel like that. It felt like putting down something very heavy that you'd been carrying for so long you'd forgotten it had weight. The following month, my paper was cited in a review article in circulation. My department chair told me the section chief at Johns Hopkins had called to ask about my availability for a collaborative research project. Thomas texted me a photo of his father's bookshelf, and in it, visible on the second shelf, was a printed copy of my paper with post-it notes sticking out of it. I showed it to Beverly, Thomas's aunt, when I saw her at the bridal shower 2 months later. She looked at it and laughed that low, warm laugh of hers. Of course he kept it, she said. Richard Wells doesn't keep things he doesn't care about. Phoebe planned the best bridal shower I'd ever been to. She insisted I give the first toast. I almost declined because I've never been good at toasts. I know how to talk to patients, to families in crisis, to colleagues across a surgical table, but something about the warmth of a party always makes me feel slightly outside my own skin. But Phoebe looked at me with that face she has, the one she's been using on me since we were kids, and I stood up. I talked about the first time I met Thomas, how he'd asked what I did, and then actually listened when I answered, which sounds like a low bar but isn't. How I'd known within the first 20 minutes that he was exactly the kind of person my sister deserved, how she'd always known how to love people completely, and now she'd found someone who knew how to love her back the same way. I did not mention my father. I did not mention Dr. Wells. I did not make it about any of that. But my mother, who was sitting in the front row, caught my eye when I finished, and I saw her exhale, slow and full, like she'd been holding her breath for a very long time. Afterward, she hugged me by the dessert table and said quietly, against my hair, "I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you." I said I knew. I'm not sure I'd always known. But I was starting to. The wedding is in September. I'm giving a toast there, too. I've already written it, twice, because I wanted to get it right. I'll probably write it a third time. My father called me last week. He asked how work was going, and when I told him, a new surgical protocol I'm helping develop, a patient who came back to say thank you, he listened, actually listened, asked a question, asked another one. It wasn't everything. It wasn't 30 years of lost conversations handed back to me in an hour. But it was something. And something, I've learned, is where you start. I drove home that night with the windows down, even though it was getting cool, because I wanted to feel the air. Baltimore in early fall smells like turned leaves and the faint salt of the bay, and I've been living here for 7 years and I still notice it every time. Small things. I've spent most of my career learning to notice the things that other people miss. The small irregularity on a scan, the slight change in a patient's color, the moment before something shifts. My father, in the driveway, hands in his pockets, not quite apologizing, but not quite not apologizing either. Dr. Wells, standing at the dinner table, saying my name clearly in a room where it had always been said quietly. Phoebe's hand, squeezing mine under the table, then letting go. You carry those moments. You don't always know you're carrying them until someone puts them down in front of you and asks you to look. I'm looking now.